Hey everyone, welcome back to Stadium Stats. This week we'll be taking a look at the Week 7 predictions, followed by my Week 7 power rankings. So without further ado, and without wasting any more time, let's jump right into it. Starting off on Thursday Night Football, we've got a revenge game, the Sean Payton revenge game, as Sean Payton's Broncos take on the New Orleans Saints, his old team. Sean Payton, for those of you who don't know, is the head coach of the Broncos. He's a beloved head coach in the league, was previously the head coach of the Saints. The Saints are coming off a loss, so are the Broncos. Neither team looked all too good in their losses, as they both lost to divisional opponents in games that were very one-sided. The Broncos were getting destroyed most of the game by the Chargers. They couldn't get anything going on offense. Their defense really wasn't stopping nearly as much as they had been in previous weeks, and their offense just could not keep up. Bo Nix did not look good. That offense had minimal yards. Their run game couldn't get going. Their pass game couldn't get going. The Saints, on the other hand, they had Spencer Rattler starting at quarterback, and it was his first start as a rookie, and he played okay. He had a touchdown, but he did have 2 interceptions. Baker Mayfield played a lot better in that game, which is to be expected, as, again, it was Spencer Rattler's first start. But the Buccaneers almost doubled the points of the Saints, and the Saints defense couldn't stop the Buccaneers for anything. They did have 3 interceptions off Baker Mayfield, but Baker Mayfield did throw for 4 touchdowns, and they scored over 50 points. So it was a really concerning showing from the Saints defense. Their offense, however, did score a decent amount of points, as they did have in the upper 20s point-wise with 27 points. While the Broncos game was significantly closer, it was really out of hand for almost the entirety of that game. The Broncos were on a 3-game win streak. The Saints are on a 4-game losing streak. And for those reasons, as well as the fact that it is the Sean Payton revenge game, I am going to pick the Broncos to win this one, especially considering Derek Carr is not playing and it will be Spencer Rattler again. However, I don't think either of these teams are incredibly good by any means, so I wouldn't put it out of the hands of the Saints to come back. I just don't have as much faith in Spencer Rattler as I do in Sean Payton's offense. Up next, I've got a Sunday morning matchup in London between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the New England Patriots. The Patriots are coming off a week that, honestly, pretty good for them. They started Drake May in his first career start against the Texans, who many people thought would be a death sentence behind that O-line for him. But he actually played considerably well. He had 3 touchdowns and 250 passing yards in his first start. Yes, he did throw for multiple interceptions, but that is to be expected in your first career start, especially with the lack of weapons and the lack of O-line that the Patriots have. The Jaguars, on the other hand, got absolutely demolished in London last week by the Bears, who scored 35 on them and over doubled their score. The Jaguars couldn't get much going on offense, as Trevor Lawrence did not look good, and the rest of that offense just was not connecting. Brian Thomas had his worst game so far of the year as the wide receiver 1 for that team, and Christian Kirk didn't do too much better. The run game really couldn't get anything going, as Travis Etienne got hurt, and Tank Bigsby couldn't get much going on the ground, as well as the fact that they couldn't run because they were down the whole entire game. Their defense also kept getting gashed by the Chicago offense, and it was just an all-around poor performance by them. I do think this will actually be a pretty bad game, as both of these teams are pretty bad. However, I think Drake May starting gives the Patriots some hope, and I think a lot of their fan base thinks that this is actually a winnable game for them. I am going to pick the Jaguars to win this one, because while Drake May does spark some hope for this offense, he is still a rookie. He's still getting used to the National Football League, and I really wouldn't put it past him to have a bad game with how bad the surrounding cast is on that team. And the Jaguars need a bounce-back game, and I think this will be the one that they've been looking for. Up next, at noon on Sunday, we've got a divisional matchup between the Lions and the Vikings. The Vikings, they're coming off a much-needed bye, which was just not as much needed as it was earned, because they are undefeated, one of the only 2 undefeated teams left in the league. They have been playing amazing. Sam Darnold's been great and way better than expectation. That offense and the run game and the pass game have all looked really good. Their defense has been one of the best units in the entire league, which cannot be understated. Every quarterback they go up against, they cause havoc for, and it's just been really poor performances from the opposing quarterbacks that the Vikings play. The Lions, on the other hand, had an absolutely amazing week in which they absolutely blew out the Dallas Cowboys, 47-9. They look unstoppable on offense. They have so much firepower between Gibbs and Montgomery and Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra and Laporta, and they look absolutely unstoppable, and Jared Goff has so many weapons. And their defense looked much improved as they held the Cowboys, who were supposed to have a good offense, to only 3 field goals. I do think this is the toughest matchup either team has had yet, as the Lions are an amazing team, but have not played an undefeated team in the Vikings or the Chiefs yet. So I do think it will be really tough, and this is a divisional matchup. I think this game will be really close, but I'm going to pick the Lions to win this one, as I think their offense is going to be too much for even the Vikings defense to handle. And while I do think the Vikings defense will slow them down, I don't think it'll be enough, and I'm going to pick the Lions to win. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Dolphins and the Colts. The Dolphins are coming off a bye week, very badly needed due to all their injuries. Tua still probably not going to be back for this game, and they have looked abysmal without him. So right off the bat, I am going to say I really don't see much hope for the Dolphins in this game. I think they are one of the worst teams in the league without Tua, as they had no backup plan at quarterback. And while Tyler Huntley played significantly better last game than their quarterback situation the week prior, it still wasn't enough for them to even get much going. Tyreek Hill is really the only thing that could save this game from being a win for the Colts automatically, as it seemed like whoever the Dolphins play is going to win week in and week out until Tua is back. But if Tyler Huntley and Tyreek can get something going, then maybe that's different. Or if Jalen Waddle or the run game can get something going. But there hasn't been any consistency on the Dolphins' offense, and their defense has not been very good. The Colts, on the other hand, beat the Titans, but only barely, and the Titans are not a good team. They were missing Jonathan Taylor, but Joe Flacco looked mediocre. He didn't look bad, but he didn't look good by any means. It was definitely the worst game he's had of the year so far. And while they have good receivers, that's really all they have. Their defense is not good at all, and realistically, if there is a game for Miami to have an explosive game without Tua, this would be the one against a Colts defense that, again, has not been very good and has been letting up a ton of rushing yards in a game in which Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert could go crazy. So as I think this game completely falls on Tyreek Hill and Devon Achane's hands, as I don't think either defense can really do very much. So it's a question of if Tyler Huntley can really get that offense going or not. And if he can, I think the Dolphins win. And I think the more likely scenario, which he can't get much going, I think the Colts win. So I'm going to pick the Colts. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Seahawks and the Falcons. The Seahawks coming off a Thursday night game in which they got destroyed by the San Francisco 49ers. Yes, they were in that game right at the end for a little bit, but then the 49ers scored another touchdown, which took them to the lead and ruled the Seahawks out of winning that game. The Seahawks started off the season 3-0, ended up becoming 3-3 going into this week, and have just looked a lot worse in the second half of the season so far, as their first 3 weeks far exceeded their second 3 weeks, but they didn't play nearly as good of opponents in those first 3 weeks. So it's a lot harder to say what this team really is. Geno Smith has been really decent, but he hasn't been excellent. He threw more interceptions than touchdowns in the game against the 49ers, and while he was leading the league in passing yards going into that game, he did have kind of a dud last week. The Falcons, on the other hand, they got the win over the Panthers. Kirk Cousins looking good, Drake London looking good, Darnell Mooney looking good. That offense looks great, but the defense really can't get much going. They're not really able to get a lot of stops. They let up 20 points to the Panthers. They also have been struggling at getting much pressure on the quarterback, and I do think that is a very big problem for this Falcons team. I am going to pick the Seahawks to win this one. I think the Seahawks defense is going to be a lot for the Falcons to handle if the Seahawks defense is healthy, which it hasn't been in a few weeks. And I think the Falcons offense, while it is a lot for that Seahawks defense, the Falcons defense is not going to be enough to stop the Seahawks offense. So I'm going to pick the Seahawks to win. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Texans and the Packers. The Texans coming off a big win in a game over the Patriots where they won by multiple scores. Yes, it was Drake May's first start, so it was a little shocking to see their defense let up multiple passing touchdowns to Drake May, but I'm not too concerned about it. Their defense is still pretty good, just not as good as we had expected going into the season. The Packers, on the other hand, coming off a major win over the Cardinals, they absolutely killed them. There was no question throughout the whole game that the Packers were going to win, and they just looked unstoppable. Their offense looked amazing. Their defense prevented the Cardinals from doing almost anything. And yes, Marvin Harrison did leave that game, but even with him, they weren't doing much in that first quarter. I am going to pick the Texans to win this one. I think the Texans are a better team, both on paper and in performance. However, I think this will be a really close and good matchup. I'm pretty excited for this game, and I think it'll be a close one. I really could see this one going towards either team, but I'm going to pick the Texans to win. Up next, we've got a divisional matchup between the Bengals and the Browns. The Bengals getting a win over the New York Giants on Sunday Night Football in a game in which their defense finally looked good. They held the Giants to 10 points, and that was a really impressive performance by that defense, who has been one of the worst units in the league. Their offense, however, couldn't get much going, as they had one touchdown, and it was from Joe Burrow's 50-yard rush in the first quarter. Outside of that, their offense really couldn't get much going. They didn't have much of a run game. Their pass game wasn't the same as it had been in previous weeks, and they didn't look that good on offense. The Browns, on the other hand, finally were in a competitive game, but they're still one of the worst teams in the entire league. Deshaun Watson looks terrible. That offense really can't get anything going, and even with him having a perfect completion percentage in the second half, they still didn't score any offensive touchdowns. I do think if Nick Chubb comes back for this game, that'll be a huge boost for their offense. However, I think it'll be a slow progression for him, and I don't think he'll hit the ground running, especially coming off how severe that injury was. That all being said, I'm going to pick the Bengals to win this one. I think their defense could show up again against a terrible Browns offense, and I think their offense, while it may struggle against the Browns defense, is still better than the Browns offense is. So I'm going to pick the Bengals to win. Up next, we've got another divisional matchup, this one between the Philadelphia Eagles and the New York Giants. The Eagles coming off their game against the Browns, in which they really did not look that good. The Browns have not been a good team, as I was just talking about. Deshaun Watson hasn't looked good at all this season. That offense really hasn't gotten anything going, and yet the Eagles still only beat them by 4. Yes, their defense looked a lot better, as the Browns really couldn't do anything on offense, but the Eagles did let up a defensive and special teams touchdown to the Browns in a game that, yet again, as I'm keep repeating myself, was close. It should not have been a close game. The Eagles are supposed to be contenders, and they should not be playing bad teams that closely. The Giants, on the other hand, they put up 7 points on the road on Sunday Night Football in primetime. It was a really bad performance on offense, and yes, they were able to hold the Bengals to only 17 points, and the Bengals offense has been really explosive, and they were able to hold Jamar Chase to not an amazing game, and they had a great defensive performance, but they really couldn't get much going on offense, and that was pretty problematic. That all being said, I do think Malik Nabers should be back for this game. And if he is, that should be a huge boost to that offense. Devin Singletary also might be back, which could boost their running game. But their running game didn't really have issues with Tyrone Tracy, and yet they still couldn't get it done on offense. The Eagles are still the better team than the Giants, but it's really not that far off, and I think they'll play each other pretty close as divisional matchups. So I could see this game going either way. And surprisingly, I think I'm actually going to go with the Giants to win this one. I think the Giants have had the Eagles' number recently, especially in those games that they played each other in last season, where the Giants ended up beating the Eagles towards the end of the year. And honestly, I just think the Giants have a better defense than the Eagles do, and the Eagles' offense isn't that impressive if Saquon can get stopped, and the Giants' defense, I think, will be enough to stop Saquon. So I'm going to pick the Giants. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Raiders and the Rams. The Raiders are coming off a brutal loss to the Steelers in a game where they lost by double-digit points. They lost by nearly 20 points, actually. They really can't get anything going on offense, no matter who their quarterback is, whether it's Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell. They both really can't get much going on offense, and their defense really can't stop anything either. The Raiders are one of the worst teams in the league right now, and with the only bright side being their rookie tight end, Brock Bowers. Besides that, they really don't have much going for them this season. The Rams, on the other hand, they are coming off a bye week. They needed it very badly as they are very injured. Cooper Kupp might be coming back for this game. That would be a huge boost to this offense as they're really missing their receivers in Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. The Rams are still a much better team than the Raiders, and I'm going to pick the Rams to win this one, whether they have Cooper Kupp or not. But I think that addition of Cooper Kupp would be a huge addition and really cannot go understated for how much of a difference that would make in this game. But regardless, I'm picking the Rams to win. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Panthers and the Commanders. The Panthers lost to the Falcons by double digits. They're not a good team. Andy Dalton doesn't look good. I wouldn't be surprised if they threw Bryce Young back in there after a little bit of time on the bench and see what they have in him. But either way, their quarterback situation isn't good, and the Commanders are a really good team. They nearly took down the Ravens, and yes, they did lose by a touchdown, but they were in the game the whole time. Jaden Daniels continues to look amazing and just continues to impress, has a really, really high completion percentage, and just playing outstanding football. Terry McLaurin's looking great. That defense is getting a ton of sacks and is putting on a lot of pressure. And I think the Commanders are a far better team than the Panthers. And I really don't see this one being that all too close. So I'm going to go with the Commanders for this one. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Chiefs and the 49ers. The Chiefs, coming off a bye week in which they got some rest. They are pretty banged up on offense. Isaiah Pacheco's out, Rashee Rice is out, but neither of those are short-term injuries. And so while Pacheco will be back at some point this season, it may not be for another few weeks, and Rashee is out for the rest of the season. The 49ers, on the other hand, took down the Seahawks on Thursday Night Football in a game in which they actually looked pretty impressive. They did nearly choke yet again, which has been a theme to their divisional opponents, but yet they did end up coming away with the win. They won by double digits, and they looked really good in the process of doing it. Their offense was performing. George Kittle looks really good. The red zone offense finally looked efficient for the first time this season, and they were getting yards after catch. Deebo Samuel took a really short catch to the house for 70 yards. Their run game looked really good, even without Jordan Mason, because he got hurt in that game, and Isaac Orlando took over, who was the fourth-string running back going into the season. Just a really impressive performance by the 49ers. And I think this will be a really close matchup. There's a reason these two teams saw each other in the Super Bowl last year. I am going to go with the 49ers to win this one, as I think the Chiefs are going to get a loss really soon, and I think of all teams to do it, it makes the most sense for it to be the 49ers. I think the 49ers will have been preparing for this game harder than any game all year, as this is the game for revenge on the Chiefs. But I could see this game going either way. Both teams are pretty good. The Chiefs obviously are the better team, but I think the 49ers offense will be too much for the Chiefs to handle, and I think the Chiefs offense is too depleted for the 49ers defense to really have too much trouble handling. So I'm going to go with the 49ers. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Ravens and the Buccaneers on Monday Night Football. The Ravens coming off a big win over the Commanders in a game where Lamar Jackson looked great. Zay Flowers continues his impressive run over the past few weeks. Mark Andrews finally was back in the fold. Derrick Henry continues to impress week in and week out. He's leading the league in yards. He looks absolutely unbelievable. Continues to get touchdowns pretty much every week as well. And their defense has been improving week in and week out. The Buccaneers, Baker Mayfield threw for 4 touchdowns. They scored over 50 points, but they did let up 27 to a rookie QB who was in his first start in Spencer Rattler. So their defense does have some question marks. I think this will be a pretty competitive game between two teams that are pretty big contenders in this league. The Ravens are Super Bowl contenders, and the Buccaneers are perennial playoff contenders year in and year out. The Ravens are still the better team than the Buccaneers, but I think the Ravens' winning streak has a chance to come to an end against this high-powered Buccaneers offense that looks pretty unstoppable as Chris Godwin and Mike Evans duo continues to look unstoppable in the passing game, and Baker Mayfield is getting them the ball consistently. And the rushing game now is pretty good with the addition of Bucky Irving in the offseason, as he has been a really impressive rookie this year. I am going to still pick the Ravens to win this one, as I think their defense is significantly better than the defense of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was able to be a Buccaneers dub. I'm just going to go with the Ravens because I think it's the safer pick. Up next, also on Monday night, is a matchup between the Chargers and the Cardinals. The Chargers are coming off a win over the Broncos in a game where they looked pretty good. Their offense was firing. Justin Herbert had his best game of the year. Ladd McConkey looked pretty good. Their run game looked really good with J.K. Dobbins. They were scoring touchdowns. Their defense was really effective as they were able to hold the Broncos to 22 passing yards in the first half. And then it started crumbling a little bit, but instead of a normal Chargers choke job, they ended up holding on for the victory. On the other hand, the Cardinals got absolutely destroyed by the Packers in a game where they really never stood a chance. They were losing the whole game. They got destroyed. They lost by over 20, and their defense looked bad. Their offense looked bad. Really just no redeeming qualities of that game for them. Kyler Murray looked fine, but that was kind of it. I am going to go with the Chargers to win this one. I think they're the better team than the Cardinals, but I think the Cardinals will be more competitive in this game than they had been last week, as I think last week was an outlier. I really do think the Cardinals are a decent team, and if Marvin Harrison's able to play in this game, I think that's a huge boost to that offense that was really missing him last week. So I am going to still go with the Chargers, but I do think the Cardinals can make this a somewhat close game. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Bills and the Titans. The Bills took down the Jets on Monday Night Football in a game in which they looked pretty good. They did let up a Hail Mary touchdown, which was probably not the best thing for their defense, but besides that, they looked pretty good. Aaron Rodgers and the Jets offense was able to score some points. Definitely played a little bit better than they had been in previous weeks. But the Bills offense was scoring. Their defense wasn't all too bad. And all in all, they got the win. The Titans, on the other hand, they lost to the Colts in a game in which they were winning most of that game and then ended up throwing by the end, which seems to be a story for the Titans this season. They are not a good team. Their offense is really bad. Will Levis is not playing well. They really don't have any receivers. Calvin Ridley had 0 catches in this game after $96 million was spent on him in the offseason. And all in all, the Titans' offense is just holding this team back because their defense is actually pretty decent. I think this will be a pretty big blowout. I'm going to pick the Bills to win this one in pretty easy fashion. And finally, the last matchup we're going to talk about is the Jets taking on the Steelers. The Jets also played on Monday Night Football, and this game is being played on Sunday Night Football now. The Steelers are coming off a win over the Raiders, which wasn't all too impressive because the Raiders aren't very good, but it was an amazing performance by the Steelers. They scored over 30 points. Their defense was able to shut the Raiders down pretty well, and they played really well in this game. absolutely destroyed the Raiders. The Jets, they lost their matchup on Monday Night Football to the Bills in a game in which they were in it the whole time. It was a pretty good game, but they did end up throwing by the end, and Aaron Rodgers threw an interception on his attempt at a game-winning drive. The Jets don't look all too good this season, even with Aaron Rodgers behind the helm, as they've scored the exact same amount of points through 6 weeks and through 5 weeks as they had last season with Zach Wilson. So that should tell you enough about that offense. Despite all of that, though, I do think the Jets are prime for a bounce back pretty soon. So I am going to pick the Jets for this to get the win here. I think the Jets offense looked a lot better in that Monday Night Football game against the Bills, and I think that will be too much for the Steelers to keep up with on offense, as I don't think the Steelers offense is typically very good. But their defense is really good and might be too much for the Jets to handle, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is a close game. Moving on to my top 10 power rankings for the week. At number 10, I've got the Bears. They absolutely demolished in their past 2 weeks. They actually killed the Jaguars in London in that last game last week, and they absolutely destroyed the Panthers the week before. Their offense is scoring a ton of points. Caleb Williams is looking great. They've thrown 6 touchdowns in the past 2 weeks. They've scored 5 touchdowns in the past 2 weeks each week. They've also been playing amazing defense, and so for those reasons, they're in at number 10. At number 9, I've got the Falcons. They look really good. They beat the Panthers, though, and I can't really put them any higher than number 9 for beating the Panthers, but they look really good, especially after that game against the Buccaneers 2 weeks ago. Their offense is really firing. Their defense is looking improved. The only problem that this team has is they have almost no pass rush, so I can't really put them any higher. At number 8, I've got the Bills. They beat the Jets on prime time. They finally got a bounce-back win. They're looking decent, but they really had those 2 weeks in a row where they looked really bad, so it's hard to put them higher, but through their 4 wins, they've looked pretty dominant. And at number 7, I've got the Commanders. They look really good. They were able to keep up with the Ravens in a game in which Jaden Daniels, a rookie, kept up with Lamar Jackson the entire time. They've far exceeded expectations this season, and they look really good on offense. Their defense has been improving week to week, and for those reasons, they're in at number 7. At number 6, I've got the Buccaneers. They've been really good on offense. They scored over 50 points against the Saints. The only problem this team is facing is that their defense is not that good. They definitely appreciated having Antoine Winfield back, but all of that being said, their defense let up 27 points to Spencer Rattler, a rookie QB in his first ever start. So I can't really put them any higher than 6, despite how good their offense has been. And at number 5, I've got the Texans. They beat the Patriots, so not too impressive of a win since the Patriots are not a very good team, but the Texans have been winning almost every game handed to them. They've been really good on both offense and defense, despite losing Nico Collins and putting him on IR. Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs stepped up, and this offense is really firing now that Joe Mixon is back, so they look really good. For those reasons, they're in at number 5. At number 4, I've got the Lions. They look like they cannot be stopped on offense. Their defense even stepped up against the Cowboys in a game in which they won 47-9 very decisively. That game was in their control the whole time, and they were at one point just kind of trolling the Cowboys by trying to score a touchdown with an offensive lineman. They were able to do whatever they wanted with the Cowboys, and this team looks actually unstoppable. Number 3, I've got the Ravens. They've been on a win streak, 4 games in a row. They look dominant throughout that whole win streak. They have the best rushing offense in the league between Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, and they just look actually totally unstoppable on offense with that rushing attack. Zay Flowers looking amazing. Mark Andrews finally stepping up again. And on defense, they've been pretty dominant too. So for all those reasons, they're in at number 3. And number 2, I've got the Chiefs. They are one of 2 undefeated teams. And I think despite being on bye this week with the Vikings, both the Vikings and Chiefs keep the number 1 spot as they are the 2 undefeated teams. They have been playing amazing football. The Chiefs have not been explosive on offense, but they've looked a lot better now that Kareem Hunt has taken over at running back, and their pass game is still working. It's efficient. It's just not explosive without Rashee Rice. It's just got Xavier Worthy, and that's kind of about it. But Juju Smith-Schuster really stepped up in the absence of Rashee Rice. So for that reason, they're in at number 2. And at 1 is the Vikings, as I already hinted at. They're also undefeated. They look really good. They were also just on bye, but they need Aaron Jones to come back in order for that run game to be effective. But they have the best defense in the league, and their offense has been firing with Justin Jefferson and Sam Darnold and Jordan Addison, and hopefully Aaron Jones can return because they really need him for that run game. But besides that, they've looked unstoppable through 6 weeks, and that's why they're in at number 1. Thank you guys so much for watching and tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow me on YouTube and Spotify podcasts and Apple Podcasts. I'll be back soon, and don't forget to tune in next time. I'll see you then. Peace.